Listen very carefully, because what I'm about to say is not meant for panic sellers, headline chasers, or short-term thinkers. This is for smart money. Over the last 24 hours, something shifted beneath the surface of this market. Not on price, not on Twitter, not on your favorite chart. In the plumbing of the financial system itself. And if you're still treating exchanges like banks, if you're still assuming it can't happen again, your XRP wallets and everything else you hold may already be exposed. Let that sink in. Because the next phase of this cycle isn't about volatility, it's about access. Not number go up, not number go down, but whether you can move your assets at all. And before you dismiss this as fear-mongering, understand something. FTX wasn't a black swan. It was a stress test, and the system did not fix what broke. Welcome back to Lion of Crypto, where we don't chase hype, we connect the dots. Now here's the uncomfortable truth retail doesn't want to hear. When stress enters the system, prices don't hurt people first. Frozen withdrawals do. Paused redemptions do. Support tickets that never get answered do. That's when people realize the difference between paper ownership and actual control. And if you're holding assets on a centralized exchange right now, I don't care how reputable it feels, how clean the UI looks, or how many influencers say it's safe. You are an unsecured creditor. That's not an opinion. That's legal structure. The moment liquidity tightens, the moment counterparties pull back, the moment regulators lean in, your assets are no longer yours. They're a promise, and promises are the first thing to break under pressure. Now, before we go any further, if you value clarity over chaos, strategy over emotion, and long-term positioning over short-term noise, subscribe to Lion of Crypto and turn on notifications. This channel exists for one reason, to keep you ahead of structural shifts before the headlines hit. Because by the time retail reacts, the doors are already locked. Zoom out with me for a moment. Globally, liquidity is tightening. Market makers are becoming selective. Regulatory scrutiny is increasing, not decreasing. Stablecoin frameworks are under review, and Basel-aligned capital rules are quietly reshaping how risk is treated behind closed doors. This is not accidental. This is the system preparing for consolidation. And consolidation is where weak structures collapse. Every cycle looks different on the surface, but underneath, the pattern never changes. Excess leverage builds. Confidence masks fragility. Liquidity thins. Access disappears. Connect the dots. This is why exchange risk is so dangerous. There is no alarm bell, no countdown timer. Everything looks fine until it doesn't. Withdrawals slow. Incentives increase. Yields spike temporarily, and behind the scenes, liquidity is shuffled to plug holes that should never have existed. That's not conspiracy, that's mechanics. And here's where most people get it wrong. They think crypto risk is about which coin pumps next. It's not. It's about infrastructure survival. History is very clear on this point. In every technological wave, railroads, electricity, the internet, speculation explodes first, then reality sets in. And only the assets with real integration survive. That's why when Brad Garlinghouse said that the majority of crypto would disappear, he wasn't being bearish, he was being honest. And this is where XRP gets misunderstood. Most people think the XRP conversation is about price. It's not. It's about whether an asset can function inside the real financial world, under regulatory pressure, compliance frameworks, and institutional scrutiny. Ripple didn't build for hype cycles. SEC pressure didn't stop development. And Basel Committee-style rules don't care about narratives. They care about risk, settlement, and clarity. This is the plumbing. And when liquidity disappears, narratives don't save you. Infrastructure does. Now let's talk about custody, because this is where generational wealth is either protected or silently erased. Exchanges are tools. They are not vaults. They are not banks. And they are absolutely not designed for long-term storage. Convenience is not safety. Leaving funds parked because I might trade later is the single most common mistake people make before an exchange failure. And that convenience becomes permanent exposure. Smart money separates functions. Trading capital lives on platforms temporarily. Long-term capital does not. Personally, I treat exchanges like public restrooms. You use them when necessary, and you don't linger. Once a position is executed, custody shifts immediately, no exceptions. This is where cold storage stops being a buzzword and starts being a survival tool. A properly secured cold wallet removes counterparty risk entirely. No balance sheet issues, no withdrawal pauses, no internal failures. But, and this matters, self-custody requires discipline. Most losses in cold storage don't come from wallet hacks. They come from human error, screenshots, cloud backups, notes apps, emails. The moment your seed phrase exists digitally, it is no longer private. It is only undiscovered. And discovery is inevitable. Write it down, engrave it if you must. Store it like the keys to a vault holding your future. Because this next phase of the cycle is not about speed. It's about control. And here's the philosophical truth most people never internalize. Market stress doesn't destroy opportunity. It destroys weak positioning. The people who emerge strongest aren't the ones who guessed the top. They're the ones who reduced risk before it was obvious. They focused on ownership over convenience, structure over noise, patience over adrenaline. That's how generational wealth is built, quietly, methodically, and long before the crowd understands what's happening. This is not financial advice, but if you can't move your assets when it matters, conviction won't save you. Now let's go where most people stop thinking, institutional behavior under stress, because smart money doesn't react the way retail does. They don't panic sell. They don't doom scroll Twitter, and they definitely don't wait for YouTube thumbnails to tell them what already happened. They prepare quietly. Here's the key distinction you need to understand. Retail reacts to price. Institutions react to structure. When volatility increases, institutions don't ask, will this pump? They ask, can this asset still settle? Can it move liquidity under regulatory pressure? Does it introduce counterparty risk? Will holding this require an explanation to compliance? Let that sink in. This is why, during periods of stress, capital doesn't disappear. It migrates away from hype, away from leverage, away from narratives, and toward infrastructure. This is where XRP enters the conversation in a way most people still don't grasp. The XRP story was never about replacing the financial system overnight. That was always a retail fantasy. The real story is integration, working inside the system, under regulatory scrutiny, alongside banks, payment rails, and settlement layers. That's why Ripple spent years building relationships instead of chasing cycles. And that's why regulatory pressure didn't kill the project. It filtered out noise. Institutions don't need an asset to be exciting. They need it to be boring, reliable, compliant, and fast. Price is secondary. Functionality is primary. This is also why people misunderstand quiet periods. Retail sees sideways action and assumes failure. Institutions see sideways action and see accumulation without attention. Because the most dangerous assets during stress are not the ones that drop first. They're the ones that cannot be used when liquidity tightens. Now let's talk about timing, because this is where most people make fatal mistakes. Exchange failures rarely happen at euphoric tops. They happen during sideways markets, low volume, boredom, complacency. That's when internal problems can no longer be masked by inflows. That's when leverage quietly unwinds. That's when gaps appear. And by the time withdrawals are paused, your choices collapse to zero. You're no longer an investor. You're a spectator. Conviction doesn't matter if you don't control access. This is why reacting late is the most expensive strategy in crypto. Smart money assumes platforms can fail, not because they will, but because they can. That single assumption changes everything. You stop chasing yield. You stop trusting dashboards. You stop confusing UX with solvency. And you start acting like an owner instead of a user. Now, let's address the psychological side, because this is where discipline separates survivors from casualties. Fear causes two behaviors: freeze, overreaction. Both are destructive. The correct response is methodical adjustment, one step at a time. Reduce exchange exposure, simplify portfolios, improve custody, improve information quality, because information quality matters more than ever. Social media amplifies extremes. Every move is framed as either crypto is dead or supercycle confirmed. Neither is true. What's happening is maturation through stress. and maturation always feels uncomfortable. You don't need insider names. You don't need rumors. You don't need to guess which exchange fails. You only need to acknowledge that centralized risk exists and remove yourself from it proactively. That alone puts you ahead of the majority. Now, here's a point that will trigger a lot of people. Regulation is not a threat to real crypto. It's a threat to nonsense. Projects that rely on ambiguity do not survive sunlight. Projects designed to operate within frameworks do. That's why divergence is accelerating. Some assets decay quietly. Others keep building regardless of sentiment. And patience, real patience, is the most misunderstood edge in this market. True wealth in crypto has never been built by constant movement. It's been built by positioning early, securing custody, letting time do the heavy lifting. The most successful participants are not the most active. They are the most selective. This is also why cold storage isn't just about security. It's about behavioral discipline. When assets aren't one click away, panic selling decreases, overtrading decreases, emotional decisions decrease. You're forced to think long-term. And long-term thinking is where asymmetric returns come from. One final risk that's growing quietly: dependency. Too many people outsource thinking to platforms, alerts, influencers, and signals. When those systems go silent, they're lost. Real confidence comes from understanding structure, not headlines. When you understand how capital flows, how liquidity behaves, how institutions operate, you don't need constant reassurance. This is why crypto was never about getting rich fast. It's about not getting wiped out while positioning for exponential upside. Every cycle removes participants who chase speed. Every cycle rewards those who build durability. Zoom out far enough and you'll see the pattern clearly. Each collapse produces a smaller, stronger market afterward. Less noise, fewer scams, more serious capital. That's not bad for crypto. That's necessary. So if you're feeling uneasy right now, that's not weakness. That's awareness. The mistake is turning awareness into anxiety instead of action. Tighten security, reduce exposure, focus on assets that matter, ignore the rest. Because when the dust settles, and it always does, the people who controlled risk will be the ones with capital left to deploy. And that is when real opportunity appears, not during chaos, but after it. This is not financial advice. But if you're still relying on platforms for safety instead of structure, you're already behind. Stay patient, stay disciplined, and remember, smart money plays the long game. If you want to stay ahead of these structural shifts before the headlines hit, make sure you're subscribed to Lion of Crypto and notifications are on. Because by the time the crowd understands what happened, the repositioning is already complete. Now here's the part almost nobody talks about: what happens after survival. Because surviving market stress is only step one. What actually creates generational wealth is what you do after weak positioning has been flushed out. This is where smart money separates permanently from retail. Retail asks, is it safe now? Smart money asks, what infrastructure just got stronger while everyone was distracted? Let that sink in. Every major drawdown, every liquidity event, every regulatory shock does two things simultaneously. It destroys leverage, point one. It hardens real systems, point two. That's why institutions don't fear drawdowns. They use them. Because once speculation collapses, the only things left standing are assets that actually move value, actually settle transactions, actually fit inside compliance frameworks. This is why utility-focused assets don't need hype cycles to survive. They're not built for attention. They're built for usage. And usage doesn't stop just because Twitter sentiment turns bearish. Now, this is where most people misread institutional silence. When banks stop talking publicly, when pilots go quiet, when announcements slow down, retail assumes failure. In reality, that's when integration work accelerates, because institutions don't build in public. They build when nobody's watching. This is especially true in payments, settlement, and cross-border liquidity, areas where mistakes are not allowed and timelines stretch years, not weeks. That's why infrastructure assets often feel boring right before they matter most. No fireworks, no memes, no hype, just quiet positioning. And this brings us to one of the most important mindset shifts you can make. Price is not validation. Function is. Retail needs price movement to feel confident. Institutions need functionality to feel safe. That difference alone explains 90% of the confusion in this market. Now let's address the elephant in the room, patience. Most people say they're long-term, until nothing happens for 6 months. Then impatience creeps in. Doubt creeps in. Overtrading creeps in. And suddenly, carefully built positions get dismantled out of boredom. This is why boredom is more dangerous than fear. Fear at least signals risk. Boredom makes people sabotage themselves. Smart money understands this. That's why they design systems that reduce temptation, cold storage, locked mandates, long settlement horizons. Not because they can't trade, but because they don't need to. They already understand something retail learns too late. The biggest returns come from time, not activity. Now, one final connection I want you to make, and this one matters deeply. As trust becomes the dominant variable in markets, decentralization stops being ideological and starts being practical. When everything works, people don't care who controls what. When things break, control becomes everything. Access becomes everything. That's why custody matters more than ever. That's why structure matters more than narratives. That's why infrastructure outlasts speculation. And that's also why this cycle is not about who gets rich fastest. It's about who doesn't get wiped out while positioning correctly. Because when the next expansion phase begins, and it always does, capital doesn't go back to noise. It flows to systems that proved they could survive stress, quietly, reliably, without drama. That's where asymmetric opportunity lives, not in chasing pumps, not in reacting late, but in being early, patient, and structurally aligned. This is not financial advice, but if you're still measuring progress purely by price, you're missing the real signal. The signal is in. Who keeps building? Who keeps integrating? Who keeps functioning when liquidity tightens? That's where the long game is being played, and smart money, they're already positioned. Stay disciplined, stay patient, and remember, markets reward preparation, not prediction. Now let me close this by grounding everything we've discussed into one clear reality. The next phase of crypto will not reward who was loud. It will not reward who was early and reckless. And it will not reward who chased every narrative that crossed their screen. It will reward who understood structure, because markets don't move on emotion forever. They move on settlement, liquidity, and trust. That's the layer most people never study. Retail obsesses over candles. Institutions obsess over plumbing, who clears, who settles, who absorbs risk, who can operate when regulators, liquidity constraints, and counterparties all tighten at once. Those questions decide survival. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Most people don't lose in crypto because they chose the wrong coin. They lose because they chose the wrong framework. They confused volatility with opportunity. They confused access with ownership. They confused convenience with safety. And by the time they realized the difference, choice was already gone. That's why this entire conversation has never been about predicting price. It's been about positioning for inevitability. Because consolidation is inevitable. Regulatory clarity is inevitable. Institutional dominance is inevitable. The only variable is whether you're positioned correctly when it fully arrives. This is why smart money isn't emotional right now. They're not euphoric. They're not fearful. They're focused. They understand that the most valuable assets of the next decade will not look exciting while they're being built. They'll look slow, boring, underappreciated, right up until the moment they become indispensable. And by then, access will already be priced in. This is also why patience is no longer optional. In a market built on instant gratification, patience becomes a competitive advantage. When you remove the ability to panic sell, when you remove the temptation to overtrade, when you remove dependency on platforms, you gain something retail never does. Time on your side. And time is the most asymmetric edge that exists, because while others burn capital reacting to noise, disciplined positioning compounds quietly. That's how wealth actually transfers, not during hype, not during chaos, but during long stretches of boredom and disbelief. So if you're feeling disconnected from the noise right now, good. If you feel like you're missing out, even better. That discomfort is the signal that you're no longer thinking like the crowd. you're thinking like capital. This is not financial advice, but if you're still chasing certainty before acting, you'll always arrive after the opportunity has passed. The long game doesn't announce itself. It reveals itself after patience has already done the work. And smart money knows that. They're not waiting for permission. They're not waiting for headlines. They're not waiting for validation. They're already positioned, quietly, structurally, deliberately. If you want to keep seeing the market from that lens, make sure you're subscribed to Lion of Crypto and notifications are on. Because this channel isn't here to entertain panic. It's here to help you outlast it. Stay sharp, stay patient. And remember, generational wealth is built by those who understand the system, not those who react to it.